Welcome. I'm Pat Takahashi. I'm in my University of Hawaii campus office. I've now been on the Manoa campus for 50 years, and my talk is on the Blue Revolution, which I think is a solution to global climate warming and other problems we have in the world. But regarding climate change, we wring our hands about this problem and can't figure out what we really want to do. Someday, of course, we'll use less fossil fuels and more renewables, but it certainly is coming along rather slowly. In a bad case scenario, we will need to consider some geoengineering solutions, but most of them I know are kind of dangerous or certainly too expensive. The Blue Revolution might offer a kind of positive geoengineering solution. If you go down at the equator 3,000 feet, the ocean water is roughly 39 degrees Fahrenheit. And this fluid at depth is pathogen-free and very rich in minerals at the right Redfield ratio. And what the Redfield ratio is effectively phytoplankton at the surface. When it dies and drops into the lower depths of the ocean, it decomposes and forms minerals, which are exactly in that Redfield ratio. If this fluid can be brought to the surface, as nature does with natural upwelling, where fisheries can be found, and there are only a few of them where the right combination allows this to occur. If we can do this through a human process, this will open up opportunities for growth at the surface. Now, if we can bring this deep ocean fluid to the surface in a large pipe and combine that with the warmer surface water as heated by the sun, in a process called ocean thermal energy conversion, we can produce electricity and fresh water. And the effluent from this facility would then be allowed to be passed back into the ocean and in some way managed so that it stays in the photic zone so growth can occur. Now, most of this ocean space around the equator is free. If you were to start a farm, you need to buy the land. Mariculture and biomass plantations in the ocean are in the sea. There is no need for fresh water. And if this deep ocean water can be fed to it, you have free fertilizer. Once you get the products, then ocean transport is the cheapest way to move large commodities around. A point to remember is that at the equator, hurricanes don't come. 300 miles north of the equator and 300 miles south of the equator, because of something called the Coriolis force, which allows hurricanes to rotate. They don't go into the 600 mile band. So someday in the future, as we build floating cities, they will be placed around the equator. Now, this artificially upwelled fluid, can we in some way utilize it in addition to all the other growth options? Can we use it to remediate climate warming? We think we can. And the way to do it is to add a little nitrogen, a little iron. And we need to test this. People have tried to, but the tests have been too short. We need a floating platform for that. So, looking into the longer term future, can a sufficient number of these floating cities and industrial parks help reduce the incidence of major hurricanes? Because it'll cool the surface of the ocean where hurricanes form if we locate these cities there. And you notice you don't have any hurricanes in the wintertime, and that's because the surface of the ocean is cooler than 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So all we've got to do is drop it a little bit, and maybe hurricanes won't form. So this is a view of the Blue Revolution platform, that circular structure on the top where 3,000 feet down we bring the water up and we produce electricity through ocean thermal energy conversion. And effluent, which is rich in nutrients, if we can manage a way to keep it in a photic zone where the sun shines, we can start next generation fisheries and mariculture in general. So that's the Blue Revolution. You put everything together and you enhance the environment. Produce clean energy, marine biopharmaceuticals, hydrogen, biofuels, fresh water, grow mariculture, and have exciting new habitats for living. Perhaps remediate global warming and prevent the formation of hurricanes. And this is not a figment of my imagination by any means. Hundreds of people from throughout the world have met, and many times in Honolulu, and I've chaired a number of these sessions, and these are some of the products from these gatherings. This photo is at the Natural Energy Laboratory of Hawaii. Back here on the Big Island on the western side is a deep ocean laboratory on land. Effectively, we want to do the same thing that we do on land right now in the open ocean under real world conditions. That cylindrical concrete facility you see on the bottom left hand corner is that first open cycle OTEC plant that was built by an organization called the Pacific International Center for High Technology Research, and I'll talk about that shortly. Let me go back to 1979. We had a second energy crisis. I was asked to work for Senator Spark Matsunaga, and just as I got to his office, Lockheed, which had used Matsunaga's influence to borrow a Navy barge, built on it something called mini OTEC, and they proved that you can do it in a floating structure. And this was anchored just off the Natural Energy Laboratory of Hawaii, which I just showed you. And so he asked me, wait, this works. Why don't you work with the Energy Committee to draft the first bill on OTEC? We did. Congress passed it. President Carter then signed it, and that led to much of what we have today. While I was doing that, I also happened to draft the first hydrogen bill, which became the Matsunaga Hydrogen Act some years later, setting the tone for hydrogen research in the United States. But hydrogen, while expensive now, in the future of floating platforms could become very, very important. In 3 years, in 1982, I returned to the University of Hawaii, and there was a new Dean of Engineering, Paul Ewan. He and I thought, well, we have a problem in society. We have university research, we have industry, we need a bridge to bring technology transfer, you might say, university research into the marketplace. And so we created something called the Pacific International Center for High Technology Research. And we got funding from the Department of Energy and Japan, $25 million to build an open cycle OTEC facility, which you just saw. Let's go further back again to say almost 50 years ago. My very first university project was funded by the Electric Power Research Institute for me to grow some marine microalgae in a raceway fed carbon dioxide that would be equivalent of coming from a power plant. They wanted to take the carbon dioxide from a power plant to grow something, and it worked. Even that long ago, we were already anticipating global climate warming. So let's go back 30 years ago now to the early 1990s, and there was the Energy Committee chairman of the state Senate, whose name is Richard Matsuura, who had a PhD in agriculture and previously had worked for Norman Borlaug of the Green Revolution. So he and I got our thoughts together and we wrote the first paper on the Blue Revolution. This was presented at the first international workshop on very large floating structures. In addition to these kinds of things, National Science Foundation and NOAA provided funding for at least a dozen different workshops and symposia on everything from, including mariculture, which is the theme of this topic. And so let me focus just for a little while on just one pathway for the Blue Revolution, which is mariculture. This is the National Science Foundation Engineering for Mariculture, Engineering in the Ocean. What all this led to is that in 1997, the Pacific International Center for High Technology Research organized a workshop drawing people from around the world to discuss the feasibility of something called the Ultimate Ocean Wrench, which is to be located in this cold water cell above a floating platform powered by OTEC. We don't want cages. We would like nutrient or temperature barriers to keep the mariculture in place, using perhaps ocean robotics to take care of predators. But effectively, does this make sense? And the group created a series of publications that suggested essentially we meet again in a couple of years. So we did in Tokyo, more of us. And that was a more in-depth look at mariculture in the ocean. We decided, okay, why don't we meet in a couple of years in Norway to sign some agreement to work together on this rather long-term process. And so we met in Bergen, which leads you to the Bergen Declaration on Next Generation Fisheries, which we signed, and this was in 2005, that's 16 years ago. Okay, so that's, just one path, as I said, mariculture. Very important and more short-term than some of the other concepts, but very important. Let's think bigger. Let's look at the challenges for the next millennium or century or so, taking us into the year 2200. What are the problems? Well, it'll be global climate warming yet. World economy is important. You've got to make money. And what about world peace? How best to attain the above? Is there a right direction to head? Is there a right way to do this? Is it space? As we've read recently, people have talked about, for example, colonies on Mars. Now, depending on who you talk to, this could cost $100 billion or maybe $10 trillion. Depends on who you ask. The International Space Station that's circling our planet will crash back to Earth in a few years. More than $100 billion will have been invested. And the question is, how many major industries did it start in space? And of course, the answer is, well, maybe zero. Then more recently, a couple of billionaires have flown into space and talked about space tourism. But what does that do for the future of planet Earth and humanity? Blue Revolution Hawaii is an organization that was formed with international links to find the funding, design, build, and operate the first large floating structure to do the experimentation. We see it proceeding in 3 steps. The first will be 150 million for this facility to be operational by 2030 to demonstrate fisheries, maybe remediate global warming. It could look like perhaps this circular object that you see in the ocean. That leads to step number 2. One would build a floating city. This year, in October, started the Dubai World Expo. The very first World Fair was held in London in 1851. So in 2050, which is 200 years, wow, 200 years after London, maybe this floating platform, Ocean City, will host an expo. Way back in time, in 1975, Okinawa had an ocean expo where they had Aquapolis as its feature item, and there's a bridge connected to it for the expo. But when typhoons head toward Okinawa, they can float this out to sea. So this was something that was already built in 1975. That's a photo of the Pacific from Apollo 11 of all the flights. So looking into the 22nd century, who knows, we could have maybe 1,000 floating cities circling the globe at the equator. These will be industrial parks linked to these cities, all renewably run with sustainable products, perhaps remediating climate warming, and also maybe reducing the incidence of hurricanes. While this is occurring, there could have been a way developed for international organizations to work together, and what would be better than to serve as a lead toward ultimate world peace. The time to begin this Blue Revolution is now. Thank you.